This is a review of the 3 official movie guides for the Hobbit movies. The title Movie Guide is kind of interesting. I'm not really sure why they didn't just call it The Making of the Hobbit, because Movie Guide makes it sound a little bit like it might be about the story or the characters, but that sort of guide to the fiction is actually another series of books called The Visual Companions, which are terrible, so don't even worry about that. Whereas this is a making of book, but as a making of book, it's just very meh. These 3 books don't do anything that is necessarily bad. It's just they're so vanilla, so uninspiring, that really the best thing I can sort of say about them is, well, they're nice. I did kind of enjoy reading them, but I don't think being nice and mildly enjoyable is really enough. And so I would never give these the same sort of high praise that I gave the Hobbit Chronicles. And yes, we do have to talk about the Hobbit Chronicles. Hopefully you're familiar with them, or maybe you've seen the reviews that I've done on that series of books that came out at the same time. On the one hand, it may not be particularly fair to compare these books to the very high standard set by the Hobbit Chronicles, but at the same time, both these series came out at the exact same time about the exact same movie from the exact same company, so comparison is inevitable. And where the Hobbit Chronicles were just the pinnacle of art and making of books, and the Hobbit Extended Edition appendices were among the best DVD and Blu-ray extra features, to have those set such a high bar for what you expect from the art and making of this movie, to then come to this book, this experience, is very mediocre. The books are written by Brian Sibley, who did the making of book for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and actually also wrote the very first making of book for the Fellowship of the Ring, which is probably one of the all-time worst making of books, because it basically falls into that category of a promotional piece, something to sort of hype people up for the movie. Now, these books certainly aren't that bad, but you see the same problems. I feel like there are 2 schools of art and making of books. On the one hand, you've got the people who are just trying to ride on a movie success, promote a movie, and make money, and it's all about publicizing the movie, getting people excited. And then on the other hand, you have the books that actually care about making a record of this film, providing an informative, entertaining, behind-the-scenes look at how the movies are made. And I think that having these official movie guides come out at the exact same time as the Hobbit Chronicles is such a highlighting of that dichotomy, and the results speak for themselves. The Hobbit Chronicle books are a much better marketing tool for the movies because they're better books. Their whole approach is better. It's an in-depth, worthwhile examination of how movies are made, the art and craft of making these movies, whereas these official guides, it's just so much of talking about the characters, about the story, about their motivations, so much sort of like the cast and crew singing each other's praises, the author singing their praises, and the whole thing really feels like the sort of making of books we used to see a lot more of 10 years ago, which is essentially like a magazine article that has been expanded. So if you've ever read any sort of on-set coverage or interviews in a magazine, or maybe on a blog or a website, you'll know the sort of format and style of writing. It's mostly just sort of talking up the people involved and the story and characters, and then only the occasional tidbit of actual making of information, actually describing something meaningful about how these movies were made. And that's exactly what these books feel like, where a magazine article might be, less than 10 pages. It just sort of feels like they've taken that and expanded it into 160 pages. Everything's so light and short and covered very quickly. And it's not like these books skimp on text. There's lots to be read here. It's just the actual content of what you're reading. You can go paragraph after paragraph and find very little insightful information. But having said that, I do not think these books are completely useless, because even though you're going to be sifting through a lot of mediocre stuff, or a lot of stuff you've sort of read or seen elsewhere, you will absolutely find certain gems exclusive to this book. For example, there was a smaller Hobbit Chronicles companion that was just about Smaug, whereas in these movie guides, Smaug has about 6 pages, and even though 95% of the information is not repeated verbatim from that book, but covering the same stuff you'll have already known from reading those books or watching the extended edition appendices, but every now and then you will get a little line or tidbit here and there that you haven't found mentioned elsewhere. And I think that as a really big fan of the behind-the-scenes process of these Hobbit and Lord of the Rings movies, that's really the thing that I find most valuable about these books, and that I am happy that I got them and spent the time reading them. Because I think that the more sort of obsessive a fan you are, the more value you get out of finding those, just little pieces that help augment your love for the movie or the making of the movie. I think these books could have been much more successful if they had a stronger ability to tie in with the Hobbit Chronicles. Because I am a little bit confused by the fact that they released 2 series of making of books on the same movies at the same time from the same publisher, and yet they're completely independent. Like, no, I'm not saying they needed to be part of the same series or anything, but there's just no acknowledgement of the fact that, the people who read these official movie guides are also probably going to read the Hobbit Chronicles and vice versa. I mean, the obvious reason for why they did this is money, of course, but I think you can do that and also have these books work together a lot better, specifically by not covering a lot of the same material, because these movie guides are actually at their best and most engaging when they're not talking about things that were covered in the Hobbit Chronicles. Because if you've read those books, you'll know that the focus there is mostly on physical art and craft, props, costumes, art and design, blah blah blah. Whereas the movie guides take a much broader approach, looking at the sort of all areas of production. So you'll read more things about like writing and directing and music, which are areas that are sort of completely absent from the Hobbit Chronicles. And in fact, my very favorite part of these movie guides was there's sort of 4 pages called Behind the Scenes, which is about the guy who was overseeing the behind the scenes documentaries for the DVDs and the online production videos. And as a big fan of the appendices on the Blu-ray, I definitely got a kick out of that section. But even then, it's only 4 pages in the 3rd book, and it's not enough to be a satisfying look into how that stuff is done. My other favorite thing about these books is the images, which I was not expecting. Now, there are 10 trillion film stills from the movies, of course, but there are also tons and tons of really, really good behind-the-scenes photos. Most of the actual art in these books has also already been printed in the Hobbit Chronicles art and design books. But one thing the Hobbit Chronicles didn't feature a lot of was on-set photography, which these 3 books do. And I love on-set photography, and this book has a really great showcase of a lot of that. So like I said, recommending these books is a lot harder than recommending the Hobbit Chronicles, because I think for 95% of people, these probably just aren't going to be worth your time. Really, the only people I think who may kind of enjoy having them are people like myself, who really are the most sort of completist fans, who want to have the entire art and making of experience. Because, like I said, I'm glad I have them. They're just never really going to go down as, all-time favorites. And actually, even though this review might have left you kind of very on the fence, there's definitely a standout bright point, and that is that the price for these books is exactly right. They're very inexpensive, which probably from a marketing perspective is why these books were released alongside the Hobbit Chronicles, to capture the market who are like, I'm not spending $40 on an art and making of book. I'll buy the movie guide instead. It's half the price. Just the other day I saw brand new physical copies of the first movie guide being sold by Amazon for like $1 or $2. Also, there are Kindle versions of these books available, and usually I don't talk about ebooks, but because they're often cheaper like they are in this case, even if this review has made you undecided about whether or not you might like the books, if you can find an ebook version or a physical version for, under $20 for that price point, it's really not much of a risk to just pick up a copy of the first one and see how you like it. And then if you don't, it's no real big loss. And because I wouldn't dare end on a high note for these 3 books, I'll tell you another dumb thing they did. For the 3rd book, for The Battle of the Five Armies, they released a signed limited edition. If you see that around, don't even bother. It's just signed by Brian Sibley and has a different cover design. That's literally just it, no extra content. Additionally, it was hardcover and the others were paperback, so lined up on your shelf, it's gonna look ridiculous having one bigger than the other 3. Maybe that only bothers OCD people, I don't know. And also, I think they might have actually released the Desolation of Smaug movie guide in hardcover as well, although I think that was probably a smaller print run. But An Unexpected Journey was only paperback. And anyway, it's a moot point because they already ruined any chance of these books sort of looking nice and uniform on a shelf, because they changed the lettering on the spine after the first book. And I mean, I'm just poking fun because who gives a crap? But at the same time, it is like, what dumbass thought that was a good idea?